Hello, everyone, and welcome to WooStream, where we're bringing Willamette to you. I'm Tiffany Newton, and for today's presentation, Barry Nelson will discuss retirement planning during uncertain times. Barry is an alum from the class of 1999 and is now an owner at Capital Financial Planners, LLC, where he serves as an investment manager and certified financial planner. Barry has also served on the Alumni Board of Directors since 2016. Thank you so much. He is a past president of Salem's Rotary Club and currently serves as chair of the Riverfront Park Amphitheater Project. For fun, Barry is a baseball umpire and section leader and soloist in St. Paul's Episcopalian Church Choir. Barry, thank you so much for joining us today and talking with us about the subject.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, and I suppose I should start by hoping that you and yours and everyone out there is healthy and safe during this time of uncertainty. And to add to Tiffany's introduction, I'm a third-generation Bearcat. My parents met at Willamette, and my mom's parents met at Willamette. So Willamette's a big part of our family and our history. I live in South Salem with my beautiful wife and two middle school boys, and so during this unusual time, we're managing to coexist peacefully. And as Tiffany mentioned, I'm a certified financial planner at Capital Financial Planners, where I've been since 2001, just near Bush Park, near the university. So as we get started here, I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you so you don't have to endure my face quite so much during this presentation. And it looks like I may have done that successfully. So as we get going and buckle our seatbelts, keep hands and arms in the car at all times, and set the stage for this afternoon, I figured that I'd share a bit of perspective surrounding what the heck just happened in the stock markets, the importance of financial planning and having a plan and how it can help during a time like this, and then opportunities and what a person can be thinking about as far as actions that could potentially be taken. And this quote has really spoken to me during this time by Vladimir Lenin, that there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And certainly the month of March, for me, felt like the latter of the two. So what the heck just happened? In the span of 6 weeks leading into the end of the quarter, we experienced record highs in the markets, believe it or not, followed by a viral pandemic, an oil price war, a near shuttering of all business activity in the economy, the fastest and most violent bear market in history, taking place over a mere 18 trading days, and just for good measure, a run on toilet paper. So no doubt all of our lives have changed in some way. During the first quarter, as we entered bear market territory, that ended the longest bull market run in U.S. history, just days after its 11th anniversary. The technical definition of a bear market being a 20% drop from record highs that were seen most recently on February 19th. And stocks continued to fall 35% from their peak, seeing a partial recovery since then. Interestingly, the recovery has created what technically could be considered a new bull market, because we're more than 20% up from market lows, though it remains to be seen whether this is what some might call a sucker's rally or the real thing. The pragmatist in me suggests that with all the unknowns remaining, we may retest recent market lows, but only time will tell. For some perspective, it took the markets a year to fall 35% during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And again, we managed to do that in a span of about 6 weeks. While the drop of 35% or so might be right in line with long-term averages during recessionary bear markets, the speed of the decline was breathtaking. And we can see on this slide how breathtaking it was in terms of measured volatility. So volatility is measured by the CBOE volatility index, sometimes referred to as the fear index. Goes by the acronym VIX. And a chart of the VIX is on the bottom half of this page, with the top half of this page being the S&P 500 since the financial crisis. And you can see we've had several major pullbacks, if you will, since the financial crisis and the trough experienced in 2009, including a couple of near bear markets, most recently in 2018 and back in 2011. And the bottom of this page is a chart of the VIX, which blew past any of the prior peaks in volatility since the financial crisis. The highest reading was around 50 during the 2011 U.S. debt downgrade crisis. You might recall Standard & Poor's downgraded U.S. creditworthiness from its AAA rating for the first time in history. It was only for a short period of time, but nevertheless, that created volatility back then. The VIX most recently here climbed to a record of 82.7 on March 16th, and was higher than its peak during the global financial crisis, the previous record of 80.9. We've come down to an area around 40 on the VIX at present, but that 82 peak was nearly 5 times the average volatility that we experienced. And of course, with markets bouncing around in March, seemingly 5% or more per day, and even reaching 10 and 12% on some days, not only to the negative, but also to the positive, we all likely were keenly aware of the volatility taking place. It's important to note that while we tend to remember calendar years that finish with poor results, such as the 2008 financial crisis or the bursting of the tech bubble, it's quite common for markets to experience declines of some significance intra-year and every year. So this chart shows the intra-year declines by year in red. And while the the average intra-year drop was 13.8%, annual returns were positive. Calendar year returns were positive in 30 of the 40 years. And the average annual return from 1980 through 2019 was 8.9%. Those average drops of nearly 14% are easy to forget when the calendar year finishes in positive territory. But more memorable, certainly, when we finish negative on a calendar year. Again, only time will tell how 2020 finishes, but some analysts are referring to 2020 as the year of the virus and 2021 as the year of the recovery. Economist consensus expectations are for a record drop in U.S. GDP in the second quarter, which makes sense, all the sense in the world, followed by recovery and positive GDP numbers for the fourth quarter of 2020, if not the third quarter. There are some analysts looking at that. But of course, it largely depends on the course of the virus. And the entire global economy needs to restart in a way that is safe and orderly, and that's unlikely to be either easy or quick. This top chart begins its timeline with the all-time high prior to the financial crisis in October of 2007. And something to note here is that your portfolio is not the S&P 500. So while it's possible that a person could own only an S&P 500 index, it's much more common for a person to be diversified well beyond that and have balance that includes assets that are not necessarily correlated to the stock market, and have balance in bonds and things of that nature. So while the S&P 500 took 3 years to recover from 2009 trough to former highs, a balanced portfolio, represented here by the light blue line of say a moderate portfolio, or the dark blue line for a more conservative portfolio, took about a year to a year and a half to recover from that trough to former highs, in large part because a balanced portfolio generally will have less volatility than the stock market as a whole, not dropping as far as the stock market when the stock market goes down. And the financial crisis was a much deeper drop in the stock market than we have seen, at least thus far, during this time, and only time will tell whether we've already seen a bottom or whether we will see lower lows than we've already seen during this time. During times of heightened volatility, a natural human response is to react and to take action. And we'll talk a bit about prudent actions that can be considered, but frequently the appropriate reaction is to do nothing, or is summed up nicely by the saying, don't just do something, stand there. It can be uncomfortable not to take action in the face of discomfort. But this bottom chart is a study from a company called Dalbar that illustrates while the stock market and balanced portfolios and most sectors performed relatively well over the 20-year period from 1999 through 2019, the average investor experienced an annualized return of a mere 1.9% due to their trading activity as measured by mutual fund flows. So Dalbar looked at the actual timing and activity of money going into and out of different mutual funds in coming up with the average investor's experience. So while the mantra in the financial world is buy low, sell high, it can be psychologically challenging to buy when it seems like the sky is falling, and challenging to sell when everything seems wonderful. And this study illustrates the average investor tends to take action at the wrong time, as they would have been much better off by not touching their portfolio instead of attempting to chase returns. All of this market commentary said, and all the news that you're seeing, keep in mind that while drawdowns and pullbacks can be painful, the market has always returned to its former high. While our lives and the economy and certain sectors and businesses will likely see adaptation in the face of permanent change, the economic shutdown and the virus are transitory, and there will most certainly be better times ahead. So regardless of what is occurring in the markets, I like to remind people to focus on the variables that they can control. So if we zoom out from the weeks-long view of the markets and focus on the big picture, we can gain some perspective. I kind of like this quote by Mike Tyson that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and we've certainly been punched in the mouth. So how is our plan holding up? It's important to revisit that. At our firm, we generally take an approach of having at least 12 months of known liquidity needs in cash within a client's portfolio, so we can process distributions without having to make sales at inopportune times and allow the invested portion of the portfolio to do what it's going to do. For example, if a client needs $5,000 a month from their portfolio, we'll have $60,000 set aside in cash. And this isn't an uncommon approach to planning of this nature. But that $60,000 allows us to know where our source for those distributions is. It provides capital preservation for that source of distributions during times like this, and allows the invested portion of the portfolio to recover as recoveries occur. In addition, we encourage a cash reserve or an emergency fund outside of the portfolio. And this will vary in amount for different people depending on their situation, but might be in the area of 6 months living expenses. And it's important to recognize the fundamentals in these building blocks. I had a client call recently who maintains a larger cash reserve than some, and said they had $100,000 in savings, and they saw a buying opportunity in the markets and wondered whether we should proceed with investing that. And I suggested that if their comfort level is $100,000 in savings before the market drop, we shouldn't be modifying that plan based on activity in the market, just as we wouldn't modify that plan if the markets were up. That is one of the fundamentals and one of those building blocks. So we're not going to try and time the market because, as illustrated in the previous slide, timing the market can be a fool's errand. Visit the balance and diversification within your portfolio and make sure that that is prudent and meets your needs and your risk tolerance. As people experience portfolio volatility to the downside, some find that their risk tolerance isn't quite what they thought it might be. And if modifications are necessary in order to allow you to sleep at night, I encourage those modifications to be modest. Don't sell it all and stick it under the mattress, but think of it more like an oil change than an overhaul or buying a new car. You shouldn't be in the market to begin with unless you're in it for the long term, and recognize that, again, recovery will occur if history rhymes. If you went into this crisis on an unsustainable course, then recent events have exacerbated the situation. But with regard to sustainability, I've had conversations with a number of clients who have expressed concern over the sustainability of their portfolios given recent market drops, who were pleasantly surprised to find that their long-term plans statistically remain on a sustainable course. Prudent planning and planning for sustainability should include the idea that bear markets and recessions are going to provide shocks to the plan from time to time. So I suppose I encourage people to not worry without substantiating the need for worry. Revisit your planning and your sustainability planning and see whether adjustments need to be made or if you're still on a good track. With regard to opportunities during this challenging time, it can be psychologically challenging to say, gee, stocks are doing horribly, I should buy more stocks. However, if your risk tolerance and your capacity for risk can handle it, selling what's done well, such as high quality bonds, and buying what's done poorly in order to get back to a target allocation within the framework of an overall plan, can potentially help when a recovery comes. So for example, if your target allocation is 50% stocks, 50% bonds, and the stock market goes down such that the stock portion of the portfolio is at 45% stock exposure and you have 55% bonds, depending on tolerance levels and whether it's right for you, one could argue that carving out 5% of the bond side of the portfolio and investing that 5% back in the stock side of the portfolio to get back to that target allocation of 50-50 would be a good approach. Harvesting tax losses in accounts that aren't tax sheltered, such as individual accounts, joint accounts, trust accounts, as one experiences capital appreciation, that appreciation goes untaxed until the time of sale. And if you were previously holding positions and felt trapped due to unrealized gains that would result in a capital gains tax bill upon sale, we've seen tremendous opportunity to make tax-efficient transitions through sales of securities that used to have gains, instead realizing losses and reinvesting in more desirable positions according to the client's strategy. Those losses can generally be used to offset realized gains elsewhere, and to the extent losses aren't used to offset gains, up to $3,000 may be used to offset ordinary income each year, with unused losses carrying forward to future years. So this can be a time for some tax planning surrounding investments and attempting to fine-tune a portfolio. The same concept holds true for concentrated positions. If a person inherited $500,000 of IBM and is therefore not as diversified as one might normally seek to be, or if a person has employer stock, either from a current or former employer, and they're not restricted in those stocks, market shocks can serve, again, as a tax-efficient time for repositioning. The recently signed CARES Act waived required minimum distributions for 2020. So for those over the age of 70 and a half who would have been required to take an RMD in 2020, or those over the age of 72, given the SECURE Act and the new beginning age for RMDs, you're no longer required to take money out of your IRA or your pre-tax retirement plan for this year. Now, for those who need the cash flow, this provides opportunity to manage your taxes or your taxable income for 2020 by self-regulating distributions from that pre-tax source, potentially taking distributions from other sources, trust accounts or Roth IRAs. So managing within tax brackets, or for example, if your required minimum distribution would have been $2,000 a month, but an ideal taxable income target is $1,000 a month, then you can take the other $1,000 a month from a non-taxable source if you have that available. Likewise, for those who don't need the cash flow, you can look for a rate of distribution that is optimal for planning, again, around maybe Medicare premiums and the taxable income that amount that affects those Medicare premiums, the taxation of Social Security benefits, or filling up those lower tax brackets. So if you have room in the 10 or 12% federal tax bracket, even though a person doesn't have to take a taxable distribution in 2020, it can be tax efficient to get money out of that pre-tax source and fill up those lower tax brackets before jumping into the 22% bracket higher. There's also the prospect of Roth conversions. This should be done in careful consultation with your CPA and financial advisor. But a person has the option at any time to convert pre-tax IRA assets to never taxed again Roth IRA assets, with the amount converted being fully taxable in the year of conversion. This generally works best for those who have assets outside of the IRA to pay the taxes on the conversion in order to maximize the amount that goes into the Roth IRA. And you want to tread carefully on this because, again, adding taxable income to your situation can have an impact on, again, Medicare premiums or the taxation of Social Security, and impact other areas from a tax planning perspective, such as deductions or credits and things of that nature. If you're anything like me, your honey-do list is getting some attention these days, and you're spending some time around the house, perhaps on some projects that you haven't had time for previously. And so if you have some time on your hands, one of those things that usually doesn't get as much attention as it should in the realm of financial planning is estate planning. So I encourage you to review your beneficiary designations. Do they still align with what it is you'd like to have happen? And if you don't have beneficiary designations, make sure that you understand the default beneficiary designation, because different companies have different default designations. Some have a default of spouse and then children, while others have a default of the estate. And those have different implications. Review the ownership of your assets. I work with a client, relatively wealthy, second marriage. They keep their finances separate, and she had been telling me that their second home was jointly owned. She paid for half of it. And I did some digging on county clerk records and found that she didn't own half of it. He owned all of it. And so we brought that to the attention of her attorney, and they went through the process of registering that appropriately, half in the name of a trust and half in his name. If you have a trust, are those assets that should be owned by the trust indeed in the trust? It does take action to actively fund the trust. Do you have a will, power of attorney, advance directive? Those are three documents that are the basics of estate planning, and I think everyone should have. If those are older documents, is your power of attorney and the agent named there still the person that you trust with that authority? The provisions of your will or the trust terms and successor trustees, trust terms and will are the dispositive provisions. Do they still align with your values and your goals and what you want to have happen upon your death or incapacity? On the topic of successor trustees, this has been an interesting one to explore lately with clients, in that I have a number of elderly clients who have perhaps a child named as successor trustee, and they generally think of that being a position of authority, and they can delegate financial decisions to children when they're not feeling like making those decisions. Well, legally, if they're a successor trustee, they have no legal authority because they are not the trustee. And so for those folks who wish to designate partial authority or have a partnership while they still have capacity, it's been a fulfilling activity really to talk with those clients and their attorneys about advancing the successor trustee to a position of co-trustee, so that the child or formerly successor trustee can stay out of the way as long as mom or dad still have capacity and want to act, but also have the ability to step in should the need arise without having to go through having a parent declared incapacitated or something of that nature. And then charitable considerations. Many have already included charitable activities or considerations in their estate planning, but if not, those organizations that you supported during your lifetime, give some thought to whether those organizations could also be supported at death. And along that line, ensure that the optimal distribution to charities versus humans who have to pay tax versus charities that don't have to pay tax is done appropriately. Given the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and the increase in the standard deduction, we've certainly seen a lot of increase in the amount of qualified charitable distributions from IRAs or IRA direct to charity gifts in order to ensure that those assets that are coming out of the IRA and going directly to charity, that's a non-taxable event. So it's a non-taxable distribution from a pre-tax asset, whereas taking the money out yourself is a taxable event, and donating to charity, while if a person itemizes their deductions, is still a tax deductible activity. If one doesn't itemize their deductions, given the increase in the standard deduction, it's not deductible anymore. So even with 2020 required minimum distributions being waived, qualified charitable distributions still make sense for those over the age of 70 and a half to be giving to charity in that manner, as while a QCD counts toward an RMD, if we have enough acronyms there, a person may give up to $100,000 to charity from their IRA in any calendar year. So I think that concludes my prepared remarks. I appreciate the opportunity and your attention, and I'm happy to take questions, but I'll turn it back over to Tiffany at this point.
Wonderful. We have about 40 folks online with us, which is really exciting. So hopefully questions will start coming in through chat or the Q&A feature. But we did get one via email from Kelly and Mark Lundquist, class of 88. Their question centers around the fact that they have several different investment accounts from their times at different companies, a 401k, an IRA, a 403b. And they're wondering what your advice would be to either maintain the accounts as they are or to put them all into one, if you have any.
Yeah, so great question, and one that a lot of people wrestle with. You ask 10 different financial advisors a question and you may get 10 different answers, but I'll give you my take. I'm a keep it simple guy. And so certainly simplifying and consolidating where that opportunity exists is what I recommend. In that, from a logical perspective, it creates efficiencies, and it also creates coordination. So having accounts in 3 different places can create potentially 3 different strategies, whereas we want to have a coordinated strategy in a single account if possible. And some can think about or consider having multiple accounts as creating greater diversification. But there is such a thing as too much diversification. And that's not necessarily talked about all that much, but if a person has 5 different large cap growth funds, you may as well buy a large cap growth index, because owning too much of different assets essentially creates your own expensive version of an index. So creating a simplified, consolidated, coordinated portfolio would be my recommendation.
Great. We have another question from Steve, who says, I have both pre-tax and DRAC Roth in a 401k. I want to roll over to an IRA. Why can't I just roll the DRAC only? This is a 401k at Fidelity.
Yeah, so I've experienced this in different ways with different companies. So usually if there is a Roth component to a company retirement plan, a person can roll over the Roth component to a Roth IRA and roll over the pre-tax component to a traditional IRA. So you're thinking along the right lines, in that you want to maintain separation of those if you can. However, sometimes I have encountered, it's somewhat rare, that the plan only allows for rollovers to traditional IRA for some reason or another. Whether ERISA mandates that a person can roll a Roth balance to a Roth IRA, I don't know, I'd have to go to the books. But if a person ends up combining those, I'll call it after-tax contributions, to a pre-tax retirement vehicle with pre-tax retirement contributions, and that total account does still end up with already taxed assets. And so as distributions come out, they would come out proportionately with some taxable, some non-taxable. But you should be able to roll over the Roth portion to a Roth IRA. At least that's my experience.
Mm. Another thing that you went into some detail was making sure that folks kind of know where their money is, who has certain like power of attorney control over some of their decisions if they are incapacitated. That can be a little scary when you're thinking of a global pandemic and people getting ill. Do you have any advice for people just starting out to maybe get help with a will or a power of attorney or advance care directive?
Yeah, do it. It becomes more important as a person ages and has dependents and has others who depend on them, whether it be children or a spouse, or as a person's assets grow. But using online tools can be a popular way, particularly for younger folks to solve the world's problems. I generally encourage a person to use an attorney and use an attorney who specializes in estate planning. There are some attorneys who they do it all, but I've seen estate planning come back to bite a person, either done online or by an attorney that doesn't focus on estate planning and really understand the intricacies behind that, particularly then as laws change and that estate planning needs to be revisited and updated to comply with current law. So there are different attorneys that serve different demographics, and so some are quite happy to serve those who are just starting out and need a first will or power of attorney and such, and then those who specialize in dealing with significant wealth.
Great. We have another question from Marie. Can you share a bit more about what you mean by sustainable course from your big picture slide?
Yeah, so in short, it's given a set of goals for many who are in retirement or facing retirement. The question is, do I have enough money to retire and have that last the rest of my life? And so taking a statistical look at the amount of capital one has amassed, the type of capital that is, pre-tax, after-tax, and the variables that come into play as one reaches then Medicare age and Social Security and appropriate timing of taking Social Security and how those variables impact then the distribution from a portfolio over time. We can look at statistically the expected demand of those retirement assets and whether a person is on a course that in a statistical likelihood, given a rate of return and a rate of volatility, is on course to run out of assets before the end of their life or not, or to meet certain targets for the various financial goals that they have. And so evaluating, if a person has, for example, $10,000 and is going to take $1,000 a month from that, well, we probably know that they're going to run out of money within about 10 months. And that's an unsustainable course. But if we have $1 million and we're taking $2,000 a month from that, what is our time frame? What are the expected other stressors that might come into play on that portfolio? Is this person 55 or are they 75? And we can look at from a statistical standpoint, the probability of, I'll put it in a positive way, maintaining those assets through the rest of one's life instead of running out of assets. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Another question from Rick. Do you recommend annuities?
I have to be careful in that answer. I have a bias against annuities generally, but annuities can serve a place in a broader plan and can certainly be helpful for those who are either spendthrifts, can't control their spending, and so need that set in stone for them by a company, or for Medicaid planning and removing assets from one's estate. They can come in helpful. But I would generally encourage an annuity to be a relatively small portion of a person's overall plan and not a focal point of an overall plan. And beyond that, I would suggest that you speak with someone who's an expert in annuities. I don't consider myself such.
So this question is my own personal one. As someone who graduated with some student loan debt, grad school debt, I'm wondering, I obviously have 30 or 40 years before retirement is really in the picture, but what are some things folks can do after they get out of college to prepare themselves to hopefully have a sustainable course and not run out of money in 10 months?
Yeah, so it's one thing to not run out of money in 10 months when you're 30 and earning an income. It's another to not run out of money when you're 65 and have traded capital for income. And I think we have some presenters upcoming who are going to address more the accumulation side of things. But I would certainly encourage, there are a lot of demands and a lot of variables that come into play when a person is just out of college. And you can go crazy thinking about, well, I need disability insurance, I need life insurance, maybe I should get long-term care insurance, and I should buy a house, and I need to save for that down payment, and I have student loans, and I need to save for retirement, and maybe I'll have kids someday, and I should save for their education. And it can't all be done. And so I suppose step one is determining the amount of discretionary income that a person has to apply, whether it be to savings or to the expenses that come along with insurances and things of that nature. But certainly looking at taking advantage of any free money that is there via an employer match to retirement plan is one of the first things to look at. Because if an employer will match, say, 3% of salary and contribution to a retirement plan, that's 100% return on your investment. And you can't get that anywhere else. So that would be step one, I suppose.
One thing I'm realizing, especially when you're talking about all those acronyms, is that financial literacy is so important. Do you have suggestions or resources for folks? Of course, speaking with a professional is very, very important and key, but to kind of up their own knowledge around this topic.
I should have a better library for that. But I tend to be, I don't agree necessarily with everything any prognosticator or media type person has to say, but Dave Ramsey seems a practical and down-to-earth radio and TV personality that provides some practical advice around just getting your arms around this whole financial situation that we face as human beings. So that's one that comes to mind.
In the meantime, is there anything that you want to dive into a little bit more from your presentation, or just the frequently asked questions you get from your day-to-day?
Gosh, nothing I could think of. I mean, I can go more into the specifics of tax planning and estate planning and things of that nature. I suppose, again, recognize that it's not all about the stock market. Um, there's a lot to, there are a lot of variables that a person has more control over than the stock market or their exposure to the stock market. And so paying attention to those other variables and stirring it into the broader financial plan is an important thing to do.
Now, I don't know how much this relates to retirement, but there are so many apps right now about budgeting, about, Bank of America has an online retirement calculator and different folks, um, or savings like Acorns or others. Do you have any that you find more trustworthy than others? Or is it, again, best to speak with someone that's a professional that can get into your personal circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question, I'm going to reveal my uh, oh um, technical ineptness and perhaps age in saying no, I don't. um, we're fortunate in our practice to work with folks who have problems surrounding wealth and having wealth. And so our focus isn't geared toward budgeting and debt relief and things of that nature. Unfortunately, I have to say, yeah, I've heard of some of those, but
That's okay. We can absolutely bug some of the other panelists who will be coming
great.
up who can talk about that too, especially the one that's focusing on getting started. I have a feeling that'll tie right in. But we have two more questions. So the first one from Irene, if you donate a large amount to charity and they say they will pay you back an annual amount, is that essentially an annuity?
Yeah, so something like a charitable remainder trust, Willamette's gift planning office would love to talk with you, Irene. Uh, and in all seriousness, the gift planning office can provide specifics surrounding that. And in my experience, not just if a person is considering a gift to Willamette, but a gift to any charity, and help with the ins and outs and what you should be thinking about with regard to a charitable remainder trust or a gift annuity of sorts. So what Irene's referring to there is if a person gives $100,000 to a nonprofit organization and wishes to receive payments in return for that, there can be an income stream that comes from that gift that went to charity. And depending on a person's goals and their need for income or desire for income from a gift like that, it can fit into their financial picture. A person needs to recognize that generally that $100,000 gift is considered more like a $10,000 remainder gift to that nonprofit organization. So don't confuse giving $100,000 to a nonprofit organization and receiving income with truly giving $100,000 to an organization. But again, depending on a person's age and the interest rates that are involved in those calculations from the nonprofits, it may serve as a tool to both provide some good to the nonprofit as well as some income to the donor.
Another one from Marie, what do you see as the pros and cons for whole life insurance plans?
Oh goodness, I'm not an insurance guy.
And we can skip it or defer if that's not your
Yeah,
background.
I know one of the later presenters does deal directly with insurance, and so that would be
Okay.
a great question for him. I can only tell you that the person I mentioned earlier, Dave Ramsey, would suggest, whole life, you don't go there. You buy term life insurance, and which is much cheaper as far as the premium per thousand of life insurance, and allows a person then to do more flexibility to save the other parts of that premium toward other uses. But there are arguments both ways. In general, particularly for younger people, term insurance tends to be my preference because, again, a person can purchase much more insurance using that term insurance premium than they would be able to achieve in a whole life policy. And the cash value that accumulates in a whole or universal life policy, I've never seen anyone retire on their life insurance policy. I'll put it that way. Now, whole life or a permanent policy can be very important for those who are planning for estate taxes or something of that nature when a person needs insurance to the end of their life. But generally, a person, in a very generic scenario, a person has a greater need for life insurance when they are younger and don't have as much capital than they do when they are older, and they have replaced their ability to earn money with capital that will sustain them for the rest of their days in retirement. And so it really depends on a person's situation.
Great. Our next question is from Sven. Can you explain the new changes in inherited IRAs? It seems like it's more advantageous to the heirs if they receive a Roth versus a traditional IRA or money from a brokerage account.
Yes. What Sven's referring to is, I believe it was the Secure Act that changed non-spouse beneficiaries, so children, grandchildren, who inherit IRA assets. Under old laws, it used to be a person could distribute the assets from that pre-tax vehicle over their life expectancy, what some refer to as a stretch IRA. So a person inheriting in their 40s might be able to take money out of that $1 million IRA they received over a 45-year period. But now the law is no more than 10 years. And so a person inheriting at this point, non-spouse, would have to remove those IRA assets over a period of no more than 10 years, potentially creating much more taxable income either during their working years or otherwise in a less than optimal type situation. So Roth IRAs being entirely tax-free with their distributions certainly are more efficient to leave to individuals. And then non-retirement accounts, individual accounts, trust accounts, generally receive what's called a step up in basis that allows a person to sell the assets, allows a beneficiary to sell the assets without tax consequence upon the death of the owner. That goes back to charitable planning in a way, in that if a person is looking to leave a slice of their estate to charity, it's much more efficient from a broad planning perspective to leave a slice of a pre-tax asset or account to charity as opposed to an after-tax or non-qualified or non-IRA type asset to that charity, as the charity is not going to pay tax on that pre-tax asset.
Great. And just a quick plug for our Office of Gift Planning. They do have a website, and we put articles up there regularly from alumni experts in the field. And there are recent ones on the Secure Act and the CARES Act. So if people want some more information, that could be a good place to start and get connected with some folks. The next question, another one from Rick. In this low interest environment, what bond maturity do you recommend?
That's a tough one because that's a bit like saying, well, what kind of stock do you recommend? In that bonds really are a very complicated universe, just like stocks are. If we're looking at a 10-year U.S. Treasury at 0.7%, Well, that's not very exciting. But if we're looking at heck, during the downturn in March, I saw a CVS pharmacy bond that was less than investment grade, so it was double B in credit quality, but it had a 13-month maturity. I was paying 10%. High yield bonds have been beaten up pretty bad, and you run the risk of a greater risk of default the lower on the credit scale a person goes, as far as picking up bonds. And so I generally am not an active trader of individual bonds for that purpose, but look to bond funds or a way of diversifying that bond exposure. But high yield municipal bonds could also be a potential place to go. If you're in the state of Oregon, though, the tax rates here being what they are, Oregon municipal bonds are pretty attractive as well. It depends on a person's situation as far as what the maturity one might seek, but given the current interest rate environment, high quality bonds are pretty difficult to get excited about right now, even though they offer the best stability for a person's portfolio. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve and how that fits in with everything else that you own. How's that for a generic answer?
It makes sense though, because it's all about that sustainability and your own comfort with risk. So it really ties into the philosophy that you seem to have to approach this with.
Well, we've had some great questions so far. I'm not much of a presentation type guy. I much prefer dealing with specifics and people's situations. So I appreciate it.
Well, at the moment, it seems to be, all is well. So if there are any final thoughts or words of wisdom you'd like to impart, this is your moment.
My moment. Oh, wow. Hang in there. This downturn in the market won't last forever. It may get more painful before we recover. And there's an awful lot that is unknown out there. But we will get through this. And again, if you have specific planning needs, seek the assistance of a financial advisor. And sometimes it's just a matter of having a chat in order to come in off the ledge, so to speak. But hang in there. We'll get through this, and happy to have had this opportunity to share a few thoughts.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was engaging. We had great questions, a bunch of people online. Hopefully you all have enjoyed and learned something from our wonderful alum here. And speaking of those who have joined us and those who may be watching this later, we have a lot of upcoming presentations. This was the first of a 3-part series with other alums who specialize in financial planning. We hope you'll join us later this week for those presentations. If you have any feedback or suggestions, you're welcome to email us at alumni@willamette.edu and check out the WooStream. We're trying to get as much content up there as possible that's relevant to all of the members of our Willamette community. And as we sign off, we just hope that you are safe and staying healthy and well. And we wish you all the best. Thank you so much. And thank you, Barry, one more time.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye-bye.